Characteristics of sources. How can you identify one source from another? And what could help a person find a source again? So first of all, what does it mean to say that something is a characteristic? It's basically a feature or quality belonging typically to a person, place, or thing and serving to identify it. And that is the key thing for when we're creating citations. All of these characteristics help us identify the source of the information, exactly where you found it. Now, you can also talk about characteristics of a person. For example, some of my characteristics are: my name is Judy. I was born in 1971 and I live in New York State. Now, characteristics about the creation of the source. This is all the kinds of things we need for citations. Who, what, how, and when are the most important ones. Who created it? What is it called? How did it get made? And when did it get made? Now, you might also need characteristics about the location of the source. Where and when. Where can you find it, and when were you last there? And that's important for sources that change often, such as a web page. So first of all, who? Who created this? The author, of course, the name of a person who is a writer of books or articles, or could be a creator of works of art or other media. So, for example, it could be the director of a film, something like that. It doesn't have to be someone who writes. But the most important thing is that it is the person who created it. And what is it called? The title, of course. So we're looking for the name of a book, a web page, an article, or another artistic work, such as the name of a film, the name of a painting, the title. How did it get made? Okay, so for this, we're talking about the publisher, the name of the company responsible for getting the source published. So publisher is not a person, it is a company or organization that makes things. And when did it get made? The copyright date, the date when the source was published. Okay, so every source has these 4 characteristics for the most part. Occasionally there will be unsigned articles, and then you just leave the author out of it, and the most important thing becomes the title. But if you know the author, that's the most important, and that's what you start with. Author, title, publisher, copyright date. Now, if your source is in a container, then you need some additional information. So unless your source is an entire book, then it must be in a container of some sort. And then you'll need some extra information. So, how did it get published? For example, a web page is in a container called a website. So it got published in the website, and the name of the website where the web page is located is what you're going to need to know. Now, an article could be in 3 types of containers. So if you have an article, it could be in a book or an encyclopedia or a periodical, and you're going to need to know the name of that container. And the periodical, of course, is an information source published on a regular schedule, such as a newspaper, magazine, or journal. Okay, now here's another thing that you might need. Did anyone else help get this article into the container? And that would be the job of an editor. The editor would be the name of the person who included the article in this container. Okay, more details. If there are many parts to this container, which part has your source in it? So we're looking for numbers here. And this usually comes up when you're talking about encyclopedias or periodicals. So, what number identifies the encyclopedia volume? An example would be volume 3. What number identifies the periodical issue? Here's an example for a journal, volume 27, number 4. Okay, where? If your source is in a container, we need to know where in the container it is located, really specifically. The location. What numbers identify where in the book or periodical your article is? So, if you're talking about a book or an encyclopedia, you'll be needing page numbers. Now, if you're talking about a web page, then what we need is the web address or URL that identifies where on the internet your web page is. And there's an example. Now, last little thing, if your source could change, such as a web page, then when were you last there? And this is called the date of access. The date when you access that web page. It's the date when you got information from the source. And there's an example here of the 5th of May, 2011. Now, it's possible that your source is in a container that is also in a second container. So, unless container number 1 is a website or a periodical you can hold in your hand, then it must be in a second container called a database, and then you'll need some extra information. So, how did container number 1 get on the internet? It was included in a database, and you need to say the name of the database collection. And a database, of course, is a digital collection of selected information with many ways to search. And where on the internet is container number 2 located anyway? The location, what web address or URL identifies where on the internet the database is. So an example would be www.abcclio.com. Okay, now for the review, characteristics of a book. Author, title, publisher, copyright year, that's the easiest one. Characteristics of a web page. Author, title of the web page, title of the container, okay, that's the website name, and then publisher and date of publication. And then we need the location, so the web address, and when you were there, the date of access. Now, characteristics of an article. Author, title of the article, name of the container. You may have to include an editor. If it's obvious there was an editor, put his or her name. The numbers that might be important, volume numbers or journal issue numbers. The publisher, you will have to have the publisher. Who created this container anyway? And by that I mean what company. Date of publication and location, page numbers. And the most complicated one of all, if you had to create it from scratch, but luckily most databases give it to you already, characteristics of an article in a database. You've got the article in its first container, right? That's everything in the circle. But then you also have to talk about the database, the name of container number 2, and the web address. Phew! Congrats, you made it to the end.